Welcome to episode 61 of the Evergreen Thumb. My guest today is Dave Benscoter. Dave is joining me today to tell us about the Lost Apple Project, a little bit about the apple growing history in Washington, and his work with the Whitman County Historical Society and WSU to recover previously believed lost apple varieties. Dave, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
To start off, why don't you tell us a bit about the Lost Apple Project and how it got started?
20 years ago, I had no idea that I'd be doing this, but I was retired, and in about 2012, I was doing some yard work for a disabled missionary that goes to my church, and she asked if I could go pick some apples for her in her orchard. I knew she lived on her family's property. Her great-great-grandfather, I think she said, came to the property about 1915. There was an orchard about 200 yards away from the house. It was on the side of a hill, so I knew she had an apple orchard. So I grabbed a ladder, I grabbed a bucket, I went over and started trying to pick, and I came back 5 minutes later, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't pick a single apple. They're all too high. And so I said, I know how to prune apple trees. My dad taught me how, and I'd always had at least one apple tree wherever I'd lived. And over that winter, I was planning to prune her trees, but before I even pruned her trees, I got to thinking about it. Those are not going to be apples that I'm familiar with. So I gave her a call, and I said, do you know what kind of apple trees are in your orchard? And she said, well, I know the very top ones. Their name were yellow transparent. They're the very first apple that ripens in the year in July. And then she called her brother, and he knew that the second row of apples was an apple called Wealthy, which also has a unique history in the United States because it was the first bred apple in the United States. But she didn't know the rest of the apples. So I jumped online, and I just basically started going down rabbit holes. It was amazing, the information on apple growing in eastern Washington. People are all familiar that Washington produces the most apples of any state, but that's all in basically central Washington, where people have access to the Columbia River or the Yakima River. And out here in eastern Washington, we live in rolling hills where basically nothing is irrigated. And anyway, I just became extremely interested, and the internet opened up to me amazing books and newspapers and records of old apples that were being raised out here. And finally, in 2013, I called or emailed some friends who I knew were apple identification experts, and they live in Oregon, and they're now with the Temperate Orchard Conservancy, a nonprofit in Oregon, and they identify apples. There are two people that work there, Joni Cooper and Sean Shepard, only two of five experts in the whole United States that can actually identify apples that are sent to them. And to make a long story short, the first year we found one. It was the fall geniting, and then things kind of snowballed after that, and now found 30 once lost varieties.
Wow. So what kind of partnerships besides the Temperate Conservancy, what other partnerships did you make in the community that helped you to move this organization forward?
Well, the following year, I approached the Whitman County Historical Society, and I knew that they had projects under them. And I asked them if they would be interested in having the Lost Apple Project as one of their projects. And the bottom line was I made a presentation to the Historical Society, and they agreed that we could be a project under the Historical Society, but we would have to do our own fundraising. And so we have been been a great partnership, because the ancient apples that once grew in eastern Washington have a surprising early history to this area, and were very important to the homesteaders that came to eastern Washington, northern Idaho, and Oregon. Actually, all of Idaho, I shouldn't just say northern Idaho. But all three states had benefits from the homesteaders planting fruit trees.
What is the process like for rediscovering potentially lost apple varieties, and how are orchards located?
Well, the way we usually find them is just through podcasts like this, people reading articles in newspapers about the Lost Apple Project or magazines, and getting in touch with the Lost Apple Project. And if the apples are in Washington, Oregon, or Idaho, we ask people if they're too far away for us to travel to pick from their trees. We ask them to send us apples. If they're near enough that we can drive there, we'll often drive to the orchards. And it's amazing how many old orchards and old trees are still living. Most of the apple orchards that I go to, I would say more than 50%, you can tell there were spaces for apple trees, and the trees have died since they were planted in probably the late 1800s. And when we're contacted by people, if we go out to orchards, we'll make a map, and the map is very important because apples are easy to see when they're apples on the trees. But once the apples are off the trees, pretty much every apple tree looks the same. So what we do is we take GPS coordinates for each tree and draw a map. And that way, if one of the apples is a possible lost variety, we can go back and we can gather grafting wood from that tree and get that grafting wood growing on some of our trees. And perfect apples are produced that way. Apples that have access to irrigation, to pest control, and we produce much better apples than they can usually be produced out in the wild.
So once you've grown those apples, how do you determine whether they're a lost variety?
Well, the first thing we do is we send the apples to the Temperate Orchard Conservancy, and they will usually send them about 200 bags of apples, which represent 200 trees every year. And what they do is they try to identify the apple. Now, some apples, of course, are very easy. Old heritage varieties like Rome and Winesap and things like that have never become lost. If they come across an apple they think could be a lost variety, first of all they'll tell us, and then the following spring, we'll gather grafting wood from that tree, send it to the Temperate Orchard Conservancy. We'll also graft it to our trees. And then then the following year, we'll also do a DNA test. And we work with Washington State University. And Washington State University has a database. And the database has over 3,000 apple cultivars in their database. And we use leaves, not the apples themselves. And so we'll send them a leaf in a little tube. And once the DNA is extracted and analyzed, they can report back to me if the app is in their database. Now, if it's not in their database, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a lost variety. Most likely, it's an old apple tree that is very rare. At least it's very rare. They have, of course, all modern apples, and I use post 1920 as my date for modern apples. We kind of establish that because nursery owners were kind of told not to order a lot of apple varieties, at least in the Northwest, in 1918, and they were discouraged from ordering some of the apple trees that eventually became lost trees. So when WSU lets me know what the result of the DNA test is, if the apple matches an apple in their database, then we know we don't have any more work to do. That's not a lost variety, and they'll have a name for it. But if it's not in the database, then we have a little bit more work to do. And usually that means gathering the apple at least one more time. Maybe it could extend on. What I've had apples that have taken 3 or 4 years to identify. But yeah, then we send those apples once again to our apple identification experts, and that job is so incredibly difficult. An apple has up to 50 different characteristics, everything from the shape of the seed to how long the stem is. That's all stuff that's way over my head. And most of the apple identification experts in the recent past and currently have basically studied under somebody else, and they have learned the process uh, by working with someone who's done it for many years. So it's just an amazing skill that I wish I had.
So, why were so many varieties lost or forgotten over the years?
Well, yeah, I think forgotten is probably the best word. You know, when the pioneers first came out, the homesteaders, apples were extremely important because if you came out in, let's say, the 1870s, first of all, if you didn't come and plan to become a store owner, and there weren't many stores because the only way you could get products from the east would be to come out on the Oregon Trail, or you could also go under South America and come up that way. Some people came that way, went to San Francisco that way. Yeah, so when the first homesteaders came out, they were granted 160 acres, had to live on it for 5 years, but everybody was scooping up 160-acre parcels of land, and uh, they had to live on what they either raised, like pigs or cattle or sheep or something like that, or grew, and that included, of course, vegetables, but it also included fruit trees. But the most important of the fruit trees was the apple. And the reason it was so important was, first of all, you could eat it fresh from July to May of the following year. And you could do that. You picked apples off the first tree in July, which was the yellow transparent. And then, of course, after the yellow transparent came other apples. But usually in July, that was about the first fresh fruit you were going to have since you were eating apples out of your cellar. None of the other fruits would keep very long in your cellar, but you had all these different apple varieties that would ripen in August and September and October. But the most important apples were the ones in October, especially late October. And those were what they called winter apples. And one of them, probably the most important apple, was the Ben Davis. And the Ben Davis is a good apple, tastes good. Nothing super remarkable about it except its storage ability. And you could put a bag of Ben Davis apples in your cellar in late October, and you could still go down to your cellar in April, sometimes even into May of the following year, and get fresh apples out of your cellar and eat them. And that made them extremely valuable. Uh, there's many ways to keep apples. You could dry them, you could can them. Uh, um, but one thing that you could do with them was to make apple cider vinegar for preserving other foods, and that was another. It's just amazing, uh, amazing how many benefits the apple had to these first homesteaders.
So, how did some of those varieties kind of fall out of favor?
I think people just kind of forgot about them. The first farmers that came out here, and this Washington. Well, and I speak for where I live, but in Washington, we're wheat growers up here, and if somebody came from back east on the Oregon Trail and came out and got their 160 acres, they were in, and let's say they were in the 1870s, even the early 1880s, before the trains arrived. You were basically farming with maybe a mule, and you had farm equipment like a plow, and 160 acres was fine for that. But as after the trains came out, and after the farm equipment started getting better and better, farm equipment also became more expensive. And for example, today you wouldn't be in much of a wheat grower if you only had 160 acres, because a combine can set you back close to $1 million. So as the equipment got more expensive, uh, and then you had the railroad where you could sell your wheat back east, people started either becoming bigger or getting out of the business totally. Basically, get big or go home. And a lot of the places that I go to these homestead orchards, were once 160 acres, but people sold them, and then no one knew the name of the trees that were there. And by 1920, there weren't very many 160-acre farms left, and all the apple trees that grew there, people just kind of forgot about. And a lot of times, these homesteaders were very smart. Almost every homestead that I go to, the apples are planted very similarly, and that is they were planted on the lowest spot on the property, or spots that the farm equipment couldn't make it into. And so when they left, if it was an area that farm equipment couldn't get to, those trees were just been untended for over 100, maybe 120 years.
Wow. So, what kind of work is happening to conserve or preserve these rediscovered varieties?
Well, the first thing after an apple is, I'll say, rediscovered, the following spring, we gather scionwood and make sure that the Temperate Orchard Conservancy in Oregon has scionwood to graft trees. And what they do is they will graft 2 trees, and those trees will be forever in the Temperate Orchard Conservancy, so they're never lost again. We also, members of the Lost Apple Project, will graft that onto our own trees. And the reason for that is that we want to produce grafting wood for other people. And every spring, we sell both grafting wood, and we also sell baby trees. And we'll graft those trees in March, and people can usually pick up their trees. We don't ship trees, and so people have to pick up the trees. But in the spring, we usually graft 150, 200 trees on orders from people, and we send a lot of grafting wood to people also. And the Lost Apple Project has a Facebook page, and if people follow that, and they're interested in getting either grafting wood, or if they're interested in picking up a tree, if they follow us through our Facebook page, the Lost Apple Project, they can be notified when the sale has started in the spring.
Great. Okay. We'll put a link in our show notes to your Facebook page so they can find you. So, have any of the rediscovered varieties become commercially available on a larger scale?
No, they haven't. And although I think I have one particular apple I think could be commercial. Well, they all pretty much all taste very good. Some of them are, first of all, too small for them to ever become a commercial variety. I'm thinking of one apple in particular. Kitageski is a very good apple, but it's not something that you'd ever get in a grocery store because it's just too small of apple. Although I must say, Stark Brothers and I think some other online nurseries now sell. I think they call them lunchbox apples. I think Pixie Crunch is an apple that is smaller. You don't see Pixie Crunch in a store, but that's marketed to I think for moms to put in the lunch of their children. But and then some of the apples also don't produce every year. They produce every other year. So there's different reasons, and I don't know them all for apples falling out of favor. But I think that the one apple that I think could actually be a commercial success would be the Shackelford. And the Shackelford it's got everything going for it. It's very good tasting. It's a it also called a large apple. It's medium to large. It's not too large. It stores well and it produces every year and it's very consistent. So I'm kind of hopeful someday somebody might grow it. We I do have one of our committee members lives in Potlatch, Tim Story of Story Orchards, and he actually grows a handful of the once lost apples and sells them.
Have you explored partnerships with nurseries or other heritage groups to make the trees more widely available?
We haven't explored partnerships with other nurseries or other nonprofits. So far, we've done this basically on our own.
Or do you have any tips then for gardeners who might be interested in heritage varieties of fruit trees?
Yeah, just reach out to us. We have we still have trees for this year, and all of our profits, of course, go into the Lost Apple Project, which keeps us going from year to year. And there's just a wealth of knowledge that we've gained over the last 10, 15 years from this project that we know what apples are good for what purpose, and we encourage people to come and try these new apples, and it's a part of our history, and we want to keep that history, and we don't want these apples to be lost again.
So is there a particular apple you rediscovered that the story of it kind of stands out as above the others?
Well, I'll tell you what, Kitageski has a fascinating history. There was a nursery down in, I believe it's Arkansas, and the nursery owner posted online probably 10 years ago that he was going to be retiring soon. And his one regret was that he'd spent his whole life hoping to come across the Kitageski that was grown in Arkansas. And unfortunately, he'd never found it. And I don't think it was even a year or 2 years later that we found the Kitageski, and it was in southern Idaho. And there were several Kitageskis in southern Idaho in an orchard. And we have a branch of the Lost Apple Project has members down in the Boise area, and somebody picked those apples and sent them in. And uh, I know it made him incredibly happy. Uh, it was an apple that he thought he'd never be able to taste, and so that kind of stands out for me.
So what's in the future for the Last Apple project?
Well, we always have a pretty good backlog of apples that need to be continue in testing. Uh, some apples for example, from last year that might possibly be lost apples. And so what we're doing is, let's say an apple from last year is a possible lost variety. Then this year, we want to make sure we get a leaf from that tree, send it in for DNA testing. We want to make sure we don't identify a lost apple incorrectly. And then John Bunker, who lives in Maine. He's an apple identification expert. We've got uh, we now send him apples to take a look at too. And so yeah, we every year, and every gosh, this year I bet I've been to 20 orchards I've never been to before. So and that's all the result of people, letting me know that there are orchards that tucked away, hidden orchards, and still producing fruit after all these years.
I think I remember when I heard you speak before, when you were talking about DNA, about being able to tell if one of the parent apples of this, if it was like a crossbreed. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, yes, apples are kind of like people. You get half your DNA from your mom, you get half your DNA from your dad, and apples are sort of the same way. You've got a mother tree that will have a blossom on it, and then let's say a bee goes over to, your mother tree is a yellow delicious, and a bee goes over and he lands on a red delicious, and then he comes over to the yellow delicious and pollinates. the apple and the yellow delicious. Well, every apple that is created on that tree and every seed in every apple on that tree has 100% different DNA than any other apple in the world. And that's kind of like people. You don't go around seeing a clone of you. Unfortunately, you'd think, well, yellow delicious and a red delicious, that probably would be a pretty good tasting apple. Probably 95% of the apples come from seedling trees. So, like an apple tree that you just happen to run into out in the woods or something that maybe, came from a bird dropped an apple or a seed or maybe some manure from a wild animal and started a seed. 95% of the time, that tree is going to produce apples that taste horrible, and they're called spitters. You just want to spit them out as quick as you can. But but once in a while, there'll be an apple that turns out great. What the DNA does, the DNA test does, it doesn't just tell you what if the apple is a known variety. It also tells you the mother and the father of the apple, and that's really cool because I've had instances where the parents turn out to be gold delicious and red delicious. Well, I know immediately that that's not a lost apple. And the reason I know it's not a lost apple is because red delicious was introduced in 1895 and yellow delicious was introduced in 1915. So the window there, and by 1918, 1920, people were not buying varieties what we now consider lost varieties anymore. So it's just, yeah, it helps us say, okay, well, that variety, we're going to forget about it because its parents tell us it can't be a lost variety. But there's other times when the parents tell us we're on the right path. Maybe that was an old heritage variety back in New England or something like that, or both parents were from that area, and we know we're on the right track if we've got that.
So, how can listeners get involved or support the work that the Lost Apple Project is doing?
Well, first follow us on our Lost Apple Project Facebook page, and we're just like any nonprofit, and we rely 100% on uh, people to donate money to our cause, and we're able to do DNA tests, and we're able to send apples uh, to experts, and you can even do Google. There's plenty of articles on our search. If you just put Lost Apple Project and Google that.
So, if someone wanted to get an apple identified that they have on their property, would you recommend that they send it to the Temperate Orchards Conservancy first, or contact the Lost Apple Project?
Contact the Lost Apple Project. Actually, you can I give my email address?
Sure.
Okay, it's dbens23@gmail.com. And what we'll do is when we get apples, we'll take their picture. We'll also put and in the picture will be a little tag with the name of the person who sent it and some kind of identification, so that as we go down along the identification process, we'll have a record of what was sent to us, and then the results usually come out by March of next year, and we'll know. Uh, Especially for the common old heritage varieties, we'll find out rather quickly if those are any of the apples that have been sent in.
Thanks so much for being here, Dave. Do you have any other final thoughts?
Thank you very much for letting me talk with people today. I really appreciate that.
Well, we enjoyed having you here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Evergreen Thumb, brought to you by the WSU Extension Master Gardener Program volunteers and sponsored by the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State. We hope that today's discussion has inspired and equipped you with valuable insights to nurture your garden. The Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State is a nonprofit organization whose primary purpose is to provide unifying support and advocacy for WSU Extension Master Gardener programs throughout Washington State. To support the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State, visit www.mastergardenerfoundation.org/donate. Whether you're an experienced Master Gardener or just starting out, the WSU Extension Master Gardener program is here to support you every step of the way. WSU Extension Master Gardeners empower and sustain diverse communities with relevant, unbiased, research-based horticulture education. Reach out to your local WSU Extension office to connect with Master Gardeners and tap into a wealth of resources that can help you achieve gardening success. To learn more about the program or how to become a Master Gardener, visit mastergardener.wsu.edu/get-involved. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected with us, be sure to subscribe to future episodes filled with expert tips, fascinating stories, and practical advice. Don't forget to leave a review and share it with fellow gardeners to spread the joy of gardening. Questions or comments to be addressed in future episodes can be sent to hello@theevergreenthumb.org. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by guests of this podcast are their own and do not imply endorsement by Washington State University or the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State.